My name is Seifried. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at the Cloud Security Alliance. And this presentation started out actually as 4 different presentations that essentially got glued together and chucked through a blender, and here we are with it highly condensed. So I hope you enjoy this. So first of all, just a quick mental map and overview of what we're going to cover, which is number 1, civilization, already built thinking machines. Number 2, complexity forces cognitive decomposition. That is, you have to break a problem up because no one person can understand the entire problem. Number 3, and here's the good news, that AI has the potential to collapse the cost of coordinating work between people and teams, which means number 4, governance of all this becomes the critical bottleneck. So what do I mean by all this? Most people, myself included, had the wrong mental model. Intelligence is not isolated, right? Cognition is distributed and has been probably since about the first hunting party several 100,000 years ago. Organizations think collectively. So for example, NASA there did not put people on the moon. It was a team effort. And the interesting thing is AI is not categorically separate. It is definitely a new technology and it's a new way of processing and doing cognition thinking. But fundamentally, civilization has already been doing computation collectively for tens of thousands of years. And the result of this is that we now have institutions, we have recognized groups of people, and you need to store your cognition. You need to write down your thoughts, and you need to coordinate that cognition. And like I said before, no individual understands civilization end to end. Heck, I would say no individual understands this mouse, or probably how lasers work. It's just too complicated. There's too much stuff, too much complexity all connected together. And humans have been building cognitive tools since literally the dawn of history. Literally, history, it means that we have recorded knowledge from these people, written knowledge in the form of clay tablets. Many of the tools that we have invented are thinking tools. I'm always reminded of the binders that fast food restaurants use to run their fast food restaurant. Like the whole knowledge is distilled into this 3-ring binder that you can use to run a McDonald's or a Burger King or whatever. Because part of it is that the context window that a human can hold isn't big enough. Reality is bigger than what any one person can understand and think about. And the other thing is that abstraction allows specialization. So having somebody dedicated to flint knapping and somebody dedicated to making bows and arrows means you can be a lot more efficient in your hunting. And then you invent agriculture and you have people who specialize in farming. And for a long time, that was 98% of humanity. Now it's about 1 or 2% of humanity, which means the rest of us can have jobs like this. And so writing was an early cognitive scaling technology and probably the foundation of literally everything we've done since. And computing and AI is literally just sort of an extreme logical extension of that. And complexity forces things to be decomposed, to be broken up into parts. So something as simple as changing the tires on a car and putting some gas in it, if you're not in a rush, is not super complicated, although there are quite a few ways to make a mess of it. But if you are in a Formula One race, you have to break the problem up, because if you do all the right steps in the wrong order, it's going to end poorly. If you do all the right steps, even in the right order, it can still end up with failure. My favorite is when they always forget to tighten up the wheel once enough, and like the car leaves the pit and literally one of the wheels falls off. And I feel like, that was kind of your job. You should have gotten that right. And so that brings in governance. You need to have somebody overseeing the process who is not necessarily involved in actually executing the process. You need management. You need people with spreadsheets who analyze it and squeak out that extra couple of milliseconds. And so coordinating all this work is a form of computation. I used to be one of these people that I focused on getting my work done, and I didn't understand and put enough value on the coordination of work. Like my favorite thing nowadays is, let's make sure we're actually all working on the same problem and that problem is the correct problem to be working on. Because especially with what we're working on now in the modern world, there's a lot of uncertainty. AI is a great example. I work on AI every day, and my knowledge is out of date, usually in a 3 to 6 month window. So it's not that I'm wrong, but I will be wrong in 6 months. Things will have changed so much. And this means we need to manage the state and the authority. So like air traffic control, who's in charge of what chunk of sky? You need to decide that and work that out in advance. Otherwise, you're going to have a real bad time. And same thing with modern, white collar work or vulnerability management. Who's in charge of what? And ultimately, who routes these decisions, who makes these decisions is one problem, but how you get the decisions to the right decision makers is another thing we have to think about. And as a consequence of this, by definition, coordination is almost always dealing with complex systems because there's almost always people involved, potentially from other organizations, your vendors, your cloud providers. There's competing goals, and there's often uncertainty. There's unknown information or information that maybe is known but is not properly like paid attention to enough. And fundamentally, I would argue that vulnerability management is a coordination computation problem. Like, let's be real. We all know we should apply patches. I mean, that's it. That's basically what vulnerability management is all about, is applying patches to software or to systems. But that's not the hard part anymore. You know, even just knowing, do we have this system? Is this system affected? Can we update this system without breaking it? One part of the business, the security people, we want everything patched right away. Other parts of the business are like, we can't reboot this oil refinery until, January, when demand is down and we can take a day off of producing oil or whatever. And then to add to this, there's the distributed decision making under uncertainty. Basically, pretty much anything nowadays involves multiple people, probably multiple teams, even possibly multiple third-party vendors. And like I said, there's this ongoing uncertainty of things you don't know or things that you do know that might be out of date and are changing. And the good news here is that AI changes the cost structure. And so I would argue AI is a new computational substrate. So we started with human thinking, and then we invented sort of very deterministic machines to do adding of numbers, multiplying of numbers, spreadsheets. So very deterministic computation that created the software world that we know. And then we created this AI that can deal with problems that software can't really deal with, like summarizing or planning. And this is where things get interesting, because traditionally you couldn't put an academic paper into a piece of software and say, extract all the core ideas and facts and synthesize a version of this that is suitable for me, with the context being, maybe I'm a Spanish banker or a German healthcare executive or whatever. There's no way you could do that with software in any meaningful sense of the word. And planning and delegation. I could not ask my software even a year ago, let alone 5 years ago prior to AI, I'm going to describe a problem to you and I want you to plan not just the solution to that problem, but what we need to further examine to fully understand the problem. And I'm going to let you do the work. I'm going to delegate it to you. Another thing is memory and coordination support. So I extensively lean on AI to summarize the work I have done and update my project tracker, and to figure out essentially what do I need or what am I waiting on. And I don't mean just like I sent an email to somebody who I'm waiting for a reply, but for example, a good example would be AI context windows. They were 8,000 tokens back in the day, 3 years ago. Now they're 1 million. And so I had a number of projects that I just could not execute with an 8,000 token window size. But once we got to about 100,000, all of a sudden, things became possible that I had previously wanted to do, but was unable to, and now they're easy. And so there's a lot of cognition that we either wanted to do or should have been doing in the past, but was simply too expensive. I recently had the AI find a security vulnerability, which in and of itself is kind of amazing that the software actually found one in about an hour. But then I had the AI read the history of this open source code and read every single commit, every single issue, every single pull request, and generate sort of a historical document that explained how this code came to be, who designed it, where did it come from, like culturally and technologically. And it made it very clear why the vulnerability was theirs, because they'd essentially applied an old sort of cultural way of thinking about their technology, but they'd rewritten most of the software, just not this part. And so that is all work I could have done. But it takes 10 to 20 hours, and it's not valuable enough for me to do in most cases, whereas now I can have the AI do it, half an hour. And the same thing holds true of coordination. The cost of having someone review everybody's work and to essentially summarize, what did they accomplish this week? That would be easily a full-time job for several people. But with the AI, you can just automate that. And so this fundamentally changes, much like spreadsheets changed the accounting industry and we could do what-if scenarios rather than working them out by hand. Now with AI, we can do planning, we can do high-level strategic thinking that just wasn't affordable because it required humans. And so if we use this properly, AI has the potential to reduce coordination friction, right? You can use AI, for example, to have read access to your Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google Cloud or whatever cloud provider you use. Give it read-only access to your configuration, and it can tell you what is running and, more importantly, how it is connected. And it can understand, given additional context, like say the software or the source code that is actually using those resources, and it can say, this is connected to this in an unsafe manner. And that's something that a human might take hours or days to figure out. You can also use it to preserve institutional memory. So here's the dirty secret. Writing documentation typically does not benefit the person writing the documentation because by definition, they already know it. They don't need to write it down. It's in their head. Writing down documentation benefits everybody else, but I'm busy with my work, so I'm going to work on the work that I need to get done, not the work that enables other people, maybe. However, if you do your work through AI, you can now say something as simple as take everything we've done and write it down as a document, as a playbook or a run book that explains how to do this. And while we're at it, can you generate a prompt that would help somebody understand and learn this or to execute this? And the AIs are now capable of doing that. And so what we need to see is we need to accelerate organizational adoption. And I don't mean adoption, but adaptation of being a partner with the AI and using the AI tools is not just a case of adopting it, but a case of changing how you do your work. So a good example is I do all my work through the AI for the last year and a half. And so it's all recorded, which is nice. But I also early on realized I had to force myself to think out loud more. So traditionally when I write a document in, say, Microsoft Word or whatever, I'm thinking and I'm writing a largely finished document and then I might edit it. Whereas with the AI, I can think out loud and capture that, which means I've now captured how I think. And I have about 18 months of those logs, which I've been using to build agents and other tools to help me and to also understand how I think and to improve how I think. And on the flip side, of course, a poorly integrated AI will simply amplify the chaos. We've already seen this with very simple examples of chatbots that don't have proper guardrails or knowledge. And, and they piss off customers, excuse my language, but they tell customers things that are wrong or things that are harmful, like those AIs telling people to put glue on their pizza to make the sauce more sticky. You don't want to do that with your email that you're sending to your CEO. Like, if you do this wrong, it will be a spectacular failure. It might even make the news. And some of these events have made the news. But if it's done correctly, at a minimum, you will see incremental gains and potentially, I've personally seen about 98% of the time I spend managing my projects, like updating my project tracker, the AI does it now. And it's a huge benefit to me. It's hugely time saving. And to put simply, it does a better job than I do. So as you probably know, security is already in a coordination crisis, right? We've got more vulnerabilities than a human can even read, let alone process. We've got fragmented ownership of systems and of process, and we've got governance bottlenecks. And implicit in everything I just said is, by and large, this is all done with and by humans at most organizations. Whereas the attackers are starting to operate more autonomously, more continuously, asynchronously, and they're operating at machine speed. And this is not theory. Like, Anthropic released a paper last year talking about a campaign that they detected where people were using AI to attack large organizations. And so currently we're sort of in the pendulum swing of attackers have gained, I think, a bit more of an advantage over defenders using AI, and hopefully the pendulum will swing back. So what this means is we need to start looking seriously at using machine speed cognition and how do we interface that safely with human speed governance. So we need to have humans in charge. The AI is not yet ready to run autonomously and handle this all. But that means that the latency, the time needed to get decisions becomes a security risk. My favorite is I've seen where attackers attack a company at 5:30 on a Friday because they know that basically nobody's going to answer the phone until Monday 9 a.m. So approval bottlenecks, can you get an emergency approval to update a system or turn it off? Is your knowledge or information up to date, right? I've seen a lot of incident responses fall apart because the system they thought they were managing had changed since they last, kind of reviewed it or did an inventory. And there were new pieces that they weren't even aware of that is what the attacker had compromised. And then there's also fragmented accountability. And this is, again, a challenge. By definition, everything we're building nowadays is hugely complex and large scale because that's what we need to get our jobs done. And so who is even the owner or in charge of things becomes a problem. And again, that's something where AI can really help by examining the system, examining the code, watching operationally, like who actually interacts with these systems and kind of updates them. And you can log all that, and it's, looking at email threads, looking at Slack message chains. You can easily have the AI do that human work of kind of keeping track of everything. And so fundamentally, governance is coordination infrastructure, right? Bad governance is bureaucracy, but good governance is actually kind of amazing. And I didn't understand this up until a few years ago because, well, to be blunt, mostly I had experienced bad governance. Processes that were required but not understood or explained or updated. And so governance needs trust and provenance, right? We need to trust in the governance. The governance needs to essentially be able to prove and show, why is it doing it this way? Is this correct? Is this the best way within the context of that organization to do this? It may not be the best way globally, and maybe you're in some regulation jurisdiction that you have to do it differently, or maybe you have some financial limitation. My favorite is all the security standards that talk about separation of trust, which is great until what happens when you have a startup with two people? Like you can't have separation of trust with only two people, especially if you want to have a bus factor of more than one person. And this also means you need memory, integrity, and accountability. So people need to get over this fear of writing things down. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that in the past we wrote things down and then they were set in stone, literally, like that first writing example. They never got updated. And so we need to be willing to not only write things down, but to then adapt and update them. And so executed correctly, governance gives you coordination. And so the emerging architecture is this humans with AI as the distributed coordination and cognition system. So the humans should provide the judgment, but the AI needs to do the synthesis and acceleration. If you ever consider having someone read more than 100 emails to figure out what's going on, that sounds like a job for AI. And then the institutions, not the people, but the actual institutions need to provide governance. We need institutional levels of rigor, which means writing things down, not just a person, but groups of people, institutions. And so the future is clearly coordinating all this activity, this work, and this thinking, and not having isolated intelligence anymore. And so the real strategic question becomes, can institutions coordinate this AI cognition or cognition in general safely at machine speeds in milliseconds or tens of seconds at the most? Again, we need the trust and provenance, we need scalability, and not just scalability in terms of volume, but scalability in terms of speed, of latency, and adaptability and with feedback loops so that we can continuously evolve and adapt. So the real question is not, can AI think? The real question is, can organizations safely use this and quickly? Because we don't have time to use AI and validate the result and spend a month on it. Like, we need to get these things done in minutes, not months. And so in closing, the real strategic challenge I think we're facing as an industry right now is that clearly AI accelerates cognitive scaling. That there can be no argument there. So institutions have to evolve, and that is one of the hardest things institutions can do. And the governance of this will determine the outcome, right? If you have bad governance, you will have bad outcomes. And fundamentally, can we, the defenders, evolve faster than the coordination complexity that we have to deal with? We don't even have to deal with the attackers yet. We actually need to be able to figure out what we are working on and what we are doing together so that we can deal with the attackers. So if you want to go deeper into this topic and other things, you can go to the cloudsecurityalliance.org/MCP. There's a model context protocol server there, and simply ask it to discuss the Beyond Human Cognition presentation. You will, of course, need an MCP client. So literally any MCP client will work with this. Just point it at that. Authentication will be optional by the time you see this. Right now it's required, but we'll be removing that requirement. And there's literally several dozen ideas, about 20 slides, and a whole bunch of research that was interesting, but it just didn't make the cut. It literally ended up on the cutting room floor for this. And so if you're interested in seeing more, you can go talk to this MCP server about it. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.